President Trump says there are no ongoing talks with Iran right now as tensions remain escalated across the region. Iran launching new attacks, reportedly firing 2 missiles at the UAE on Tuesday. Millions forced to take shelter as a result. President Trump reiterating the Strait of Hormuz is still open and the U.S. naval blockade is in effect.
Well, I mean, as usual, Trump is lying, okay? The disastrous quagmire war that we find ourselves suffering through, thanks to Israel, of course, continues to translate into, the Strait of Hormuz remaining closed. It's not open. In fact, here's what's actually happening with the strait.
Iran says the critical waterway will stay closed until the US meets certain conditions.
And let me make it clear, until America implements its commitments under the Memorandum of Understanding, including lifting the blockade on the release of frozen assets, lifting the oil sanctions, ending threats and military operations on all fronts, and other conditions that America has agreed to under the understanding, the strait will not be reopened.
The strait will not be reopened until the Trump administration agrees to the conditions set in the Memorandum of Understanding. Now, currently, Trump is pretending like he has made the decision to take a different approach in the war. Rather than re-engage kinetically by striking Iran, Trump is holding out hope that Tehran will, eventually cave to his economic pressure campaign. Now, I would argue that this approach is, less about the administration making a strategic pivot and more about the fact that we've depleted our missiles and interceptors. Homeboy's got no choice. Regardless, economic pressure through more sanctions is unlikely to work. Iran has been dealing with US imposed economic sanctions since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And look, please, I'm just a dumb talk show host. Please don't take my word for it. As Politico reports, US ambassadors and other Middle East experts are skeptical that tightening the economic vice will force Iran to relinquish its desire to toll ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz and make the other concessions Trump is demanding to bring an end to the war. Now, it would make more sense, in my opinion, to engage in diplomatic negotiations with Iran to get the Strait of Hormuz open again. But the ship seems to have sailed on that. Now, who would really trust the United States with Trump acting as erratically as he does? Former Middle East ambassador James Jeffrey, who actually did serve in Trump's first term, even went on the record telling Politico that it's hard to believe there will be something decisive after 20 years of US sanctions and Iranian experience of going around them. Even those close to Trump, who are generally supportive of maintaining economic pressure on Iran, are pretty wobbly in their defense of these sanctions. In fact, one former Trump administration official who was granted anonymity by Politico said the following. Quote, I think the economic pressure would need to hit them in new ways we haven't seen so far to change the mindset of the regime. Yeah, that's the ticket. More sanctions in different ways, yeah.
Noble Mobile is one of our top sponsors. We love those guys. They save you a ton of money. So they've got a new proposal for you guys. It's gonna save you even more. So you can't pay more than $50 ever. You get money back for if you don't use your data. So it's already an incredible deal. TYT.com/switch. Now they're saying your first month's going to be only $10. So that's depending on how much data you use, savings of $20 to $40, right? You could download the app to track your brain rot index. That's how much you can save each month using your phone less and spending more time doing things that actually make you happy. So just a ton of wins in here, and the cell phone service for me has been perfect. I didn't have to change my phone or anything else on the phone. So please don't waste money. So if you're paying over $50, definitely. I think if you're paying over $30, switch now and you get the first month for $10. So TYT.com/switch, TYT.com/switch.
Meanwhile, Iranian leaders are mocking US efforts to sanction them into submission. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Iran's parliament, said on X that Americans think squeezing Iran harder will win concessions that were never part of the agreement. Bessent and Defense Secretary Hegseth are way out of their league. Stop waiting for the clown crew to pull a rabbit out of their hat and clean up the mess you made. Even some anchors on Fox Business are side-eyeing the sanctions strategy and are even willing to challenge its effectiveness. In fact, get a load of how this Fox Business host just challenged Victoria Coates, the vice president of the Heritage Foundation.
Because of the maximum pressure campaign of President Trump's first term, their economy is really distorted. They can't produce what they need domestically. And so they're very heavily reliant on imports. So this action by UAE, combined by the effects of the blockade keeping other imports out of Iran, is really going to have a devastating effect.
Between the economy and needing those imports to come into the country and not being able to get oil out and other economic sanctions, you would think that this was a regime that was on the brink of collapse, Victoria. And I imagine that's part of the US strategy right now. Why escalate if that would be something that is coming down the pike? But for whatever reason, the regime is able to hold on. And there are even more reports that Russia is supplying Iran with shipping drones and possibly even explosives. So they're replenishing weaponry and giving them the ability to snap back and bite back and attack and be on the offensive now.
Now, I'm not sure about the claim that Russia is getting weapons to Iran, because the fact of the matter is, Iran has the manufacturing capacity to build their relatively inexpensive drones, and they have re-upped their missile inventory. So that's the reality on the ground. The United States, on the other hand, has depleted its weaponry on behalf of Israel, and we find ourselves incredibly vulnerable in this situation. But look, I don't want to make it seem as though Iran hasn't suffered at all. They have suffered economically and will continue to do so. And when I say suffer, I'm not talking simply about the IRGC or the mullahs or the supreme leader. I'm talking about the very people of Iran that this administration and all sorts of Zionists across the country purported to care so much about. We are so worried about the poor Iranians, which is why we want to starve them to death. So anyway, Iran's year-over-year inflation has risen 88%. Food prices have more than doubled. But the United States, along with the global economy, is also suffering. Not only have energy and food prices risen in the United States, the yield on 30-year US government bonds jumped on Tuesday to its highest level since just before the global financial crisis. Okay, so we're gonna cover that at length later in the show. But in case anyone thinks the bond market's behavior has absolutely nothing to do with the war, Politico admits that, look, the increase in the yield to its highest level in nearly 2 decades but isn't solely because of the 6-month war. Global fuel shortages, which is caused by the war, and broader instability, which is caused by the war, have kept energy prices higher for longer, increasing the threat of persistent inflation. In other words, the war. Like, what was that paragraph? Anyway, let me continue. What does this all mean? So Julia Coronado, who's the founder of Macro Policy Perspectives, says that we are in a situation where we're spending more and more to finance more and more. By the way, our national debt officially hit $40 trillion today. Congratulations. So we find ourselves in a game of chicken with Iran. This is game theory. Who will cave to economic pressure first? Iran sees this fight as a war for their survival, while Americans just don't. In fact, Americans don't even support this war. Americans also are not accustomed to, they're not used to the type of economic pain that Iran has grown accustomed to for decades. Keep in mind that the midterms are coming up, and the latest Reuters Ipsos poll shows that Trump's approval rating is tanking. It has sunk all the way down to 33%. And that is not going to translate to a good outcome for the Republican Party in the midterms. So the pressure is on for Trump. The question is, will he find a way to end this through diplomatic means? Or are we gonna continue on with this closure of the Strait of Hormuz being the new status quo, which of course is gonna lead to ongoing inflation that harms Americans who have already been in a pretty bad economic situation to begin with? That's where we're at. That's the reality.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. totally not true. But it does keep you updated on our live shows.